From the top of the world, fabulous 1340 KAB.
Hi, mateys.
Like it's spooky.
To the ships at sea who can hear my voice, look across the water into the darkness. Look for the fog.
Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of Red Fog Radio. I'm Brian.
And I'm Rod.
And since this is our first episode, we're going to give you a little synopsis of what the show is all about. So Red Fog Radio, where indie artists of every genre and medium find a frequency to be heard. Each episode brings the hosts into intimate conversation with musicians, painters, filmmakers, writers, and creators who don't fit neatly into categories, but shape culture from the edges. From lo-fi beats to oil-stained canvases and experimental soundscapes, Red Fog Radio explores not just what artists make, but why they make it.
And the big reason why we wanted to do this is that we really want to highlight those indie artists, whether it's movies, music, writing, podcast even. And we just want to show our love for this, and we wanted to help them get a bit of a push too.
And we wanted to kind of go out of the horror genre and just open this up to everybody. And what did we do, Rod? The first person that we get on as a guest.
Well, it's a horror writer and podcaster.
So this is a friend of Rod's.
Yeah. Well, loosely acquainted through his brother.
We're friends now. You can say it.
We're friends. Okay. Miles Tritle here. He's a writer. He's a podcaster. He's a musician. A little bit, yeah. But welcome to the show, Miles.
Thanks for having me. I love the idea for the show. It's great to highlight some indie artists, and I'm not just saying that because it's benefiting me right now, but I think we need more of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we had another show under the spooky umbrella that was called Indie Spotlight, where we did that, but it was just horror related. And then my co-host on Spooky, of course, Clint. And then we had another co-host, but she had a fire and lost everything. And I think she's just kind of still not back to that part where she's like wants to get back into podcasting. I mean, it takes a lot of time. You know that from recording your episodes of your show and everything you have going on. It's a lot of work.
Absolutely. And it's always more than you think it's going to be too.
Yeah. Everybody thinks it's easy. Oh, just get a computer, plug in a microphone and put headphones on. Yeah, it is that easy if you don't want to make yourself sound professional or, good or put out episodes all the time. If that's all you want to do is just do it on the fly. I consider you a professional. I've listened to your show. It's very good. You're a professional. You're more professional than Rod and I.
Well, you're more professional. You got sponsors, damn it.
Yeah. I guess I've been doing it just long enough. Some of it's luck too.
That's pretty cool though. Absolutely. And we're doing this also, it's not because really you're sponsors and you're kind of successful at this and in your own way where you're able to actually get something from it. But what you're doing, you do the Warning Woods podcast.
Yep.
Where you basically put out an episode
just about once a week.
Yeah, original episode too. I mean, this is all from your head. I don't know where this comes from, the dark places you have to go for this. But first, I want to go over some of your other works because you have like 3 novels that you have out there. And the first one is The Collins House, which I want to go in more depth, but I'm going to go over the other 2 just real quick.
Sure.
So I bought all of Miles' books and he was generous and he gifted me one with Warning Woods in there. Was it 20 stories? Is that what
20? Yeah. I think there's 20 or 21.
Thank you very much. Mr. Secrets, that was your second one. And it's kind of like your first in a way where there's a haunted house kind of theme. But where'd you get your inspiration on this?
For Mr. Secrets, that one, it kind of was an idea that it's not the most original concept, but just kind of what happens if you get people trapped in a house that don't know each other, that all come from these different backgrounds. And, how do they handle this situation? Obviously, there's some conflict for them to all survive, not to spoil anything, whether they do or don't. They have to find some way to resolve those differences and kind of find the ways that they can all come together. So again, this sounds like the plot of a Pixar movie, not a horror novel, but I wanted to take that idea, put it into a horror setting. And during the writing of that one, a lot of my goal was just to make it feel like you weren't certain of the fate of any of these characters, that everyone was to some extent at risk, maybe even disposable at times. So I just kind of wanted to keep people on their toes with that one. And as we go through this sort of Pixar story of these people coming together, it also tears them apart.
Well, I wouldn't call it Pixar. I mean, maybe Blumhouse or something like that.
Sure.
But and then the third book that you put out, it's called The Owl. It's a much shorter one. It's only like, what was it, 120 pages. This is one I started in. I'm about a quarter of the way through, but you've changed your genre a little bit, as far as I can tell so far, into like a creature feature. And then whereas Mr. Secrets was based in Illinois and then the Collins house is in Iowa, this one you move into Indiana. So you're kind of jumping around states in the Midwest there.
Yep, I love the Midwest. I don't venture out of it too often, but I live in Iowa. I'm kind of right in the middle of Iowa and Ames. And geographically, it's not the most interesting, but you don't have to go too far to start seeing some cool and sort of atmospheric places. Indiana was something that just came to mind because we were driving back from North Carolina. My family did a summer vacation out there, drove back, and just coming through Indiana, kind of in that we're exhausted, just wanted to get home. Everybody's tired. And so I think everybody fell asleep but me. And there's parts of Indiana that are higher than you'd think. You'd think Midwest is just flat, but there's actually some pretty decent elevation up there. And there's spots where you can kind of just look out over these trees that look like the opening shot of, basically any A24 folk movie. It's just got that foggy kind of atmosphere. And I thought, this is where I'm going to set this story. I was planning. The Owl actually was one of my first ideas when I first started writing. Like around the time I was putting the Collins house together, I had the original concept of the Owl kind of come to me, and I held on to it and waited until I could really build it up in my mind and get the full story. And I made it my 2023 Halloween special for the podcast. It was just long enough that I felt like I could print it and not be ripping people off, but also the audience just really attached to that story, more so than they had previous Halloween specials or any just, stories in general. So I printed that and published it in that format just as a sort of a thank you to the audience for their support during that. It's priced very cheap. If people go on Amazon, it's like $6, so you can pick it up pretty cheap and easy. And it's been very successful in that format as well. So I think that story seems to resonate with people, and it's sort of inspired me to do more stories in that world as I keep going in the Whirling Woods.
I think you said, Rod, that was the one you thought I should read. I am the farthest thing away from enjoying any book. I have a 7-year-old and she reads probably more this month than I've read in a lifetime. So for us to have authors on the show all the time, we have other friends that are authors, and I always give them a hard time because they have podcasts too. I'm like, we've had like 18 authors on our podcast and you've had 2. What are you doing? You're an author.
Right. Yeah, if you could come up with a book with pictures, Brian would appreciate that.
Yeah, if you have like a graphic novel, I'll take a look at that.
There you go.
When you talked about the Owl, Rod was like, this is the one I think you should get and you would read. And it's nice and short, and it's a creature feature. So,
And I will tell you, because I don't like to rip people off, the whole story is available for free on my YouTube and my podcast feed. If you're more of a listener than a reader, you can get it that way too. But, I think some people just like to have that physical book in hand.
What age would that be, like, would you say, for the Owl?
Written for? That one, I'd say 12 and up. Since it was written for the podcast, I kept it pretty clean. I was telling Rod a little bit when we met in person, I have a background that was somewhat sheltered in a very kind of Christian conservative household. So not a lot was let in, and I got hooked on horror at a pretty young age, but the limitations of like swearing in movies and stuff like that, it kind of kept me from exploring until I was able to get out of the house and do my homework on all the history that I missed. And so when I write, even though I try to push into some really creepy and dark territories, I try to keep it appropriate for younger ages, for those curious people that are kind of just getting in. There's plenty of stuff out there for the adults. I'm not necessarily writing stories that are for teens, but they're available for them. There's nothing in there that should get them banned from a library or something like that, so to speak,
Right.
Yeah, it's definitely something I could grab a copy of and check out myself and then shelf for a year or two for my, my daughter. So
Absolutely. Yep.
I own more books that I won't read than anybody I know.
Yeah.
I'm probably in the same boat.
Okay. And now we'll go into your big novel, your first one, your debut, The Collins House. So this is, from what I've been told, is loosely based off of your experience as a kid. Was this set in Collins, Iowa? Is that where the house was?
It sure was. And the description of the house in the book is exactly what that house is. If you follow that description and you drive into Collins, you're going to find the house no problem.
And I found it funny that the character is Thomas Trotter, which is oddly similar to somebody's name. I mean,
yeah, and it's a weird coincidence. My middle name is Thomas, and I don't know how that happened. It just sort of fell onto the page that way.
No, that's cool. I mean, I don't know if anybody would even have noticed but me, because knowing, or at least one of your family members. But so can you share your experience in that house that's not necessarily part of the book, but maybe part of what happened there?
Absolutely, yeah. So I'll just tell you the real story, and I won't tell you which parts are in the books and which ones are not. I always tell people when they pick it up that it is based on a real experience that I had, and you might be surprised which parts of the book I made up and which parts I didn't. So that was a house. We moved in there when I was 13 or 14. I might have been just about to turn 14, from Ames. So we kind of moved out of town into this acreage, and it was on 6 acres of kind of just open ground with this big old barn, and the house itself was built right at the beginning of the 1900s. I think 1902 it was built there. It might have been 1920s, I can't remember. But it was an older house, kind of been in this one family the whole time. So we were the first family to move in that wasn't related to the people that built the house. And I'm going to tell you this story in slightly altered chronological order, because there's some details that are going to make some stuff that happened early on even creepier. So after being in the house for a good chunk of time, maybe even close to a year, we went up and explored the attic for the first time. And it was an older house where the attic actually had a solid floor to it. You could go up there. There was enough room to store things and keep a good amount of stuff up there. And we found out that the previous family had not cleared out the attic when they left. It was very classic. I mean, it's like the type of attic they'd put in a Conjuring movie or something like that, where there's, cobwebs everywhere and just these boxes of stuff. And most of it was just random, like empty picture frames and that sort of thing. And there's this one long box in the corner. And I went over to it and flipped it open, and there was a dusty, cobwebbed braid of a woman's hair, chopped off where the hair would meet the head, just this preserved braid of some lady's hair. We can assume someone within the family that lived there. Why they kept the braid of hair up there, we don't know. We really don't know anything about that family. But it kind of made something that the owner said to us when we first moved in a little bit extra suspenseful. I can't remember why she was there the day we moved in. She might have just stopped by. It was a small town. So she saw us moving in, and she drove over, and she was a very older lady. She was selling the house just because she couldn't live there anymore by herself. And she's really sweet. And we're in the living room standing in front of the fireplace, and she's just kind of absently stroking the mantle on the fireplace there. And she goes, "Well, if there's any ghosts in this house, they'll be friendly." And she didn't elaborate on that. She didn't explain it. And, that on itself, we kind of laughed it off. Oh, that's a kind of a creepy thing for somebody to say, but she's a sweet old lady, And she said if, right? That's the operative word there, if there's ghosts. And then things just kind of went south for us. Water main broke while we still had all of our belongings down in the basement from moving in. We hadn't unpacked stuff yet. So basically everything we had got soaked. That was like the second week we were there, really early on.
Wow.
Our dog got hit by a car on the highway.
Whoa.
These are things that just happen to people. We're not feeling like there's anything going on. It's just, oh, this sucks. Right after we move, we got to deal with this. We got to deal with that. There was this dead cat we found in the barn, all dried up and kind of mummified. And there was weird stuff. But what really kind of got us thinking on a different track was one night my mom, who has never believed in ghosts or anything like that, has never had any experiences in that sort of way. The master bedroom was next to mine, and one night I woke up to her just screaming her head off, like middle of the night, bloody terror, sounds I've never heard another human being make. Then I heard my dad's voice join in, the what kind of thing. And then it goes quiet, and it's quiet for a long time. And so I kind of creep out into the hallway, and I see my brothers are out in the hallway, and they're looking at me going, "What just happened?" I'm like, "I don't know." So mom comes out and she says, "I'm sorry. I woke up and I could have sworn I saw a shadowy figure leaning over the bed, and I couldn't move." So kind of your classic like sleep paralysis sort of thing.
Wow.
That then happened 2 more times.
To just your mom?
To just my mom. Only my mom, and it was always the shadow figure. Now, that kind of got us all talking about anything that we've experienced or anything we'd seen. My brother Brody, who you know, Rod, I don't believe he had anything specifically happen to him. My youngest brother, Cameron, he was pretty frequently waking up in the middle of the night and sleepwalking around his room, jumping up on stuff, saying there's snakes on the floor and that kind of thing. Now, I will say he had done similar things in previous homes, so that may have just been coincidence, but we'll throw it in for the story. My sister, I don't believe, really had anything happen at first. But I've never sleptwalked, never had any paranormal experiences in my life at this point, was frequently waking up in the middle of the night at a walk-in closet. I'd walk in there, I'd get clothes out, I'd lay them on the bed, and then I'd go back to sleep. I've never done that before. I have never done that since, only in that house. So it's really just kind of like this collection of things got us all kind of creeped out.
Nothing malicious then, really?
Well, nothing, no, nobody got touched or anything by this. It was nothing like that. But we're getting to kind of the climax of the story for me, for at least my experience of this, because it's all happening in the middle of the night. You know, it's weird. There's weird shadows. We're right by the highway, so maybe, you know, the curtains are making a shadow my mom's seeing or something as a car goes by, and then the car leaves, it's gone. Who knows? We've got all these explanations and stuff. So then we decided to leave that house, move out. Things just weren't going well for us there. We were missing Ames, so we're getting back. One of the last nights we were there, we got everything kind of packed up, and my parents had gone into town for one reason or another. I was at the house alone with my sister, who at the time was 5. Yeah, she would have had been 5. She was 5. And so little kid. I'm just watching her at the house, and she wanted popcorn. So she was upstairs in her room. I go down to the kitchen. I start popping some popcorn, and it's a microwave that's up above the stove, so it's at eye level, right? So then the light's on in there. So I watch the popcorn pop. When it stops, light goes off. And I swear to God, there was a shadow standing behind me of a man, and I froze, just thinking, okay, the light just went off, my eyes are adjusting, it's going to go away, and then it moved. It shifted. It was like the part that would be the head kind of moved in a little bit behind me, like it was trying to almost hide behind me.
Wow.
I grabbed that popcorn and I ran upstairs and didn't say anything to my little sister at the time. You know, I just kind of shut the door, was like, yeah, let's have some popcorn, you know, we're going to be out of here soon. So yeah, that is the true story behind the Collins house. You can read in the novel where I let my imagination take me there.
Yeah, I mean, that's where a lot of things come for writers, is some kind of, you know, life-based thing.
Yep.
What about you, Rod? Have you ever had any paranormal experiences?
Okay. Yeah. Well, okay. Well, this is going to be a paranormal podcast now. But yes, I don't know. I might have been half asleep. I was like 7 years old. We were living in California in a suburb of LA, and it was like a duplex situation kind of thing. And I remember waking up and seeing a clown and it laughing at me. And then I, you know, hid under the blankets, because that's what kids do, and counted to 10 or whatever, and then looked back and it was gone.
Ooh.
But it never happened ever again. So it was probably something where I was like maybe half asleep or something.
You always wonder though, right? There's always that possibility.
Yeah. Living outside of LA, it was probably a real clown.
Yeah, it probably was a clown.
Like, stuck into the house. I was like, I'm going to scare these kids. And then it wandered out.
Yeah. What about you, Brian?
Oh, I've worked in healthcare and hospitals and everything for almost 30 years. I've had all kinds of experiences. So
I've heard hospitals are hot spots.
I could go on and on and on about stuff. I mean, I work in an office now that's been around for 30 years, but it's attached to a hospital that's old, you know, over 100 years old. And we have a ghost that we call Cottage Kathy. You know, you hear a sound, you're like, oh, what do you need, Kathy? You see an elevator open, there's nobody there. You see a shadow go around a corner, and it's never malicious, like you said. I've never had anything malicious happen. I definitely believe in spirits and energy. And again, I just never anything malicious, and I tend to not bother them. I think that's the big thing, is you respect them and you just move along your day.
I do too.
I'm not trying to be like the people in Poltergeist and, you know, like build a house on top of anything. So,
yep.
Okay. So one last thing before we get into some other questions. The Warning Wood podcast. I mean, you literally have hundreds of episodes.
Yeah.
And there was one that kind of stuck with me for some reason. I don't know why. I kind of mentioned it to you. It was Grandpa was a big man. I'm just going to read the synopsis that you put on there. A grandson receives a touching heirloom after his grandfather's funeral. His plan to grieve privately changes when he's attacked in the motel room. That's kind of all you give. But this ends up, spoiler alert, turns into a ghost story. And it's an unusual ghost story for me, because these robbers, they attack this guy. They're starting to rifle through his stuff. And for some reason, they kind of lose sight of things, and one shoots the other. Then the cops come and they shoot him, kill him. But the ghost of these robbers follow this guy they were assaulting. And when I was listening to it, it was like, why are these guys bothering him? He didn't do it. They did it to themselves. Why are they going after the cops and stuff? But it made for a very interesting story, because eventually you find out that this guy has a guardian, his grandpa, and kind of follows him through the attached object that he got from his grandfather's funeral from his grandmother. It was a letter opener. Where did that come from then?
So that was one of those stories that came to me sort of through scenes. There's a lot of times I write a lot of these stories, so I kind of grab whatever I can and start spinning it into something. And the idea of the heirloom being connected to the spirit of the relative, and that sort of being a portal for that relative to then act as a guardian. And the grandfather in that story, he sort of explains the mechanics of that a little bit to his grandson when he sort of reveals himself, about how he made sure to give something special for all of his family to remember him by, so that he could continue to protect them. Now, underneath all of that, there's an underlying theme. I don't get in too much to like elevated horror type stuff, but that one in particular, there's some pretty strong themes of PTSD in that one. So the grandfather talks about how he was protected by his grandmother's spirit in a similar fashion when he was fighting in the trenches of World War II. And he talks about how all the soldiers saw ghosts. They just didn't talk about it. They kept those ghosts to themselves. So that kind of touches on the trauma of war. These spirits from the motel following the main character through the story, that's sort of the ghost of his traumatic experience of having his motel room broken into and being attacked in that way. So that's kind of buried underneath what's on the surface, sort of just a ghost story with good and bad spirits. And it can just be that for the people that want it to, but if it resonates on a deeper level with the deeper themes, that's great too. I don't push themes into the story. I try not to inject them, but if I stumble across them on the way, I will certainly follow that thread. And that was a story where I did that pretty heavily. As soon as the ghost started following him, I got the idea then for the grandpa's story about his ghost that he saw and that protects him. That actually came during the writing process.
Oh, nice.
Now, when you do these stories, do you do any research? Because you're talking about the grandpas being attached to a relic, and I've heard that a lot from other people that have had issues with ghosts. I have a coworker that used to live a couple blocks away, and she got, when she was in Louisiana visiting, a mirror, and she brought it home, and there was a spirit attached to it. And she has a picture clear as day from the outside of her house. She took a picture of the window, and she was like taking pictures of the flowers outside, but that ghost is standing in that window near that mirror. And then when you're talking about the people dying, you don't always, as a ghost, I've heard, you don't always go to where you die or stay where you died. You stay in that moment. A lot of ghosts will be, it's not their death, it's someone they cared about's death. So maybe those two robbers are stuck in this moment where it's not their death they're stuck in, it's their cohorts, each other's.
Sure. I like that idea. Yeah.
Do you do a lot of research when you write these stories, or do they just kind of, it's a lucky accident and it sounds great? Because everything I'm hearing from you is, I'm thinking, because I'm a huge horror fan and Rod is too, I'm going back to these movies. The ghost story reminds me of the Frighteners movie with Michael J. Fox. This whimsical, bumbling idiots shot each other and then they're stuck. And then when you talked about the earlier story with the people trapped in the house, it goes back to the Night of the Living Dead, the original and the remake, or Dawn of the Dead, where it's this group of people that they're kind of stuck together and they have to figure things out, and they're all from different walks of life. But I know you said you don't interject stuff in, but as readers, you can interject as yourself. You're like, oh, well, that's my cousin, and that's this family member, and that's family member, and that's me, So you kind of interject yourself into those stories. And that's
Absolutely.
what a good writer does. I mean, they bring you into those stories.
That's something I keep in mind. And to answer the first question about, the research, yes, I do, but not really directly. I watch a lot of YouTube videos about supposedly true paranormal experiences. I watch YouTube videos about, people that then try to kind of dissect what could be going on, kind of the mechanics of the spirit world, so to speak. And I'm also, before I was into horror books, I was a huge horror movie fan. So I think I pick up a lot from the movies that maybe someone else researched and kind of finds that way. But As far as, people kind of injecting themselves into the stories, I keep that in mind very much when I'm writing. And I actually sort of intentionally, unless someone has to have a certain physical characteristic for the mechanics of the story to work, I try not to describe or at least over describe my characters so that people can kind of use this character as a blank canvas to paint whoever they see the character as onto, whether that be someone from their own family or their own experience, or just as simple as choosing an actor they're familiar with that this character seems similar to so that they can picture them that way. And some people might disagree with that. There's some authors who might say that's maybe lazy, or, not to describe your characters, but, my stories are so short too that I just don't want to waste too much time describing someone's, their hair color.
You don't want to Stephen King it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, how many of his books could be 40, 50 pages shorter? And now he also has a poetic talent for description, and I think that's okay to showcase that to some extent. But yeah, some of those books, you get to chapter 45 and nothing's really happened yet. You're like, I don't need to know more about the town right now. I want to know what happens next.
Read J.R. Tolkien, where it's like a whole chapter about the color of the grass in the Shire.
There's a chapter in The Two Towers that I will fully admit I skipped when I read those books because I got about halfway through it and realized nothing was going to happen that applied to the story at hand.
And The Warning Woods, you have such a variety too, because it's not only the ghost stories like we're kind of focusing on. You have creature features, you have possession, you have serial killers, you have just a wide variety. And I'm just amazed by how many stories you're able to just put out on a regular basis. I mean, kudos.
I appreciate it. I've got a lot of ideas and I always get excited about them and I want to get them out. So that's kind of where that comes from. It's just getting it from my head out to the audience. That's all I care about.
Speaking of things we care about, let's go and hear from our podcast network, and we're going to come back and hit Miles with some questions.
You're listening to the Prescribed Films Podcast Network, home to hundreds of hours of free podcast entertainment. The shows on this network all have a common goal, providing you with the best discussions about movies and other forms of entertainment media. The PFPN hopes to fill your earholes with audio joy. Visit our website with links to all the other amazing shows at www.thepfpn.com. Thanks for listening.
These will probably be questions that we'll use for most of our guests, but we'll start with you. You get to be the guinea pig.
Awesome.
I mean, I showed Rod the questions. He didn't answer them. He just looked at them. So
just looked at them.
At the end of the day, we are a pop culture and movie podcast, music and all that stuff. So these are going to be pop culture. First one is movies and TV. Is there a movie or TV show, classic or recent, so you can pick from any genre, any time period, that has deeply influenced your creative style or the way you tell your stories through your art?
Man.
I mean, and you could pick two or three. I mean,
yeah. A big one for me is Sinister.
Yeah.
I saw that one in the theater. I got out of work early and I just popped over spontaneously. There was one other guy in the theater with me and he decided to sit like right behind me. So there was just some guy, didn't know what he looked like, who he was, just sitting behind me while I watched Sinister the first time.
Oh, God.
But outside of even that experience, it's such a simple idea and it's something that there's really nothing original about it when you get down to it. And yet it still hit like a brand new movie. The imagery, the use of jump scares, which I don't tend to enjoy that much anymore. I liked them more when I was younger and I got burnt out on them pretty quick. But that movie, I feel like, does them well. Something about that 8mm film is so creepy too. So Sinister stylistically influences me a lot. And I think that ties into the subgenre that most influences me is found footage. Just no matter what, if it's a paranormal or, like a fake documentary style about a serial killer or whatever. I just watched Strange Harvest. That was a good one. Like that. So whatever the subject is, Bigfoot, is The Willows, I think is the name of the movie. There's a Bigfoot, Willow Creek. That's what it is.
Willow Creek, yep.
Yes. Anything found footage. There's something about that, immersive sort of style in shooting it, that even though I don't always write in the first person or the present tense, I try to bring the mystery that comes with found footage in. You also don't tend to always get the strongest resolution. Think about the Blair Witch Project is probably the most famous found footage movie ever, and that movie just ends with the biggest cut off cliffhanger that you can imagine, and yet it feels complete. It kind of leaves it to the audience to speculate about what's going on, and man, have they. It's created a whole online culture of people that are coming up with theories and speculation. I love that about found footage, and you can kind of apply that to all horror to some extent, but there's something about found footage that grips me, and I think since Sinister found a way to bring that in, that may be why that movie hooked me so much.
Sinister is like one of the scariest movies, I think, of this century.
Yeah.
I watch it and I can't watch it in the dark half the time.
It's a good one.
I think Rod and I have one that's, I don't even know how it's found footage, but it's not. Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon.
Yeah.
Which is one of my favorite. It's one of my top 10 horror films, but it's that weird found footage where you're following this crew that's asked to film this guy.
Oh, okay.
Who's a serial killer that they know.
Yeah, they know. So, and it's in the realm of Freddy and Jason and all these serial killers are real. And then there's another one that if you like creepy stuff, there's a movie called Creep.
Oh, absolutely.
Creep 2 and Creep Tapes.
In the series, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
if you know that, then yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Was there one early in your life? You said you got into horror really early. Was there one that you remember that was like your gateway into horror that was like, okay, this is like grabbed me and I'm stuck forever?
Yeah. So this is going to sound funny. It is Stephen King, but not a horror movie. Stand By Me.
Yeah.
So I know that came up when Rod and I were talking too, and I didn't really get into this story, but I was very young. My parents had a VHS that they recorded off TV, so all the swear words and everything were gone. There's a few scenes from that as I watched it as an adult, was like, that definitely wasn't in there either. But so I watched a very edited version of that, but they left the body in there, and I was so terrified. I was probably 8 years old, and that body that they show on screen for 5 seconds, not even. And now when I look at it, I'm like, it's clearly fake. But as a kid, that was probably the first portrayal of a dead body I'd seen. And even though it kept me up for nights and I was terrified and my mom had to put music on to help soothe me to sleep and all that stuff, I wanted to see it again. And I remember that specifically wanting to go back to that movie and see specifically the part that scared me. I wanted to revisit that. So that was really early on. And then somewhere, I think we watched, some of the Tim Burton stuff, Nightmare Before Christmas, things like that, more of in the kind of fantastical, spooky world. I always enjoyed Halloween and that sort of thing. But when I was 13, I had a friend who kind of started to more or less encourage my parents to open the gates a little bit. And he'd bring some movies over and he'd be like, I swear there's no sex in this one. There's not too much swearing. It should be fine. Let him watch this. One of the early ones was Paranormal Activity. So getting back to the found footage.
Yeah.
And even though, people love to rag on those movies, they will always have a special place in my heart because I saw it when I was young enough that it scared the shit out of me. And really, for a week, I was scared. And then, I just caught up on the franchise and got deep into that. So that was probably the first sort of franchise that really got me. And then as I was, kind of going down that path, my parents, who were teenagers in the 90s, they introduced me to Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street, all that kind of stuff. So, yep, that was sort of the journey there.
I was a teenager in the 90s.
Yeah. Yeah, your parents are our age, so.
Yeah.
Next, we'll move on to the same question, but for music. Is there a band, an album, a song, a type of music that when you're in that mood to write or you have a story idea hit that you're like, okay, I got to put on this kind of stuff. Let it take me on this journey.
I am a huge metal fan in general, specifically deathcore, metalcore. That's the stuff that really gets me going whenever I'm not writing. I cannot write to it, unfortunately. There's some instrumental stuff. There's a band called Night Verses that's sort of like an instrumental, sort of more high energy Tool is how I would describe them. That's kind of the heaviest stuff I can listen to when I write. But what I really listen to a lot of, I don't even know really what to call it, but it's this sort of like Viking folk or it's like Northern European. A lot of it comes from Denmark, Norway, those types of planes. Bands like Wardruna, Heilung. Oh gosh, there's a whole bunch of them. And most of them I probably can't even pronounce. But
well, we have a friend that would love you right now, and he's a writer too, Brian Clark.
Yeah,
little shout out. So yeah, he's into the metal scene. What you're saying, he probably knows these bands. So
does voiceover work for bands.
Okay.
When you started talking about music, I'm like, okay, he needs to listen to Justin Beam's record, Phantom Lightkeeper, because that has that Norwegian horror feel to it. And then we have a friend that does a show called Mad Ghoul Radio that loves like Trent Reznor and all those people, and it's just, I would call it a college radio station, but like 10 clicks better.
Got
is
it.
what
Okay.
I say that show is. But yeah, Brian Clark you and him would probably talk about bands forever. And when you say Norwegian, I always think of the movie Heavy Trip. Have you seen this movie?
I've not, no.
So there's Heavy Trip and there's Heavier Trip, and it's about this death metal band, and they live in a Norwegian town. They want to go to this festival and play and make money. So it's horror adjacent, but it's like that buddy comedy kind of with all this stuff thrown in.
Awesome.
I just bought a copy from Vinegar Syndrome of Heavy Trip, so it's sitting over there on the counter still in the wrapper like most of my movies. But
they're there when you need them. That's what matters.
Yeah, I think that's why we like asking these questions, because seeing you, I'm like, this kid probably listens to, I don't know, he lives in the middle of Iowa. He probably listens to pop music, or
he was probably growing up on Justin Timberlake.
Yeah. Then he rebelled against his parents and listened 90s country, and
No, I'm a metalhead through and through. I do enjoy pop occasionally. I have varied tastes. I'm a huge Lana Del Rey fan, massive Lana Del Rey fan, but I also love Disembodied Tyrant and Whitechapel and all that.
No, I haven't. Yeah, if you say, they sound like Severin movies.
I know. Yeah,
metal and horror are married.
Oh yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Next thing we'll go to is an event. Is there a major cultural moment or an event that shifted how you see your role as an artist? Was there something in any time in your life that you're like, okay, that makes me think differently about my writing or what I want to do with my life and where I want to go?
So, and this might be an answer you get quite a bit. The pandemic kind of threw everything on its head, and I was able to work from home. And there's really practical reasons that allowed me to write. It just gave me the time and kind of the space. My daughter was born at almost the exact same time. She was born in August of 2019. So she was a little baby when all that was going down. And so I honestly started writing just as a creative outlet that I felt like could lead to some sort of career in case the career I was in was no longer to be had. There was a sort of desperation, which is probably, Rod, what led me to so aggressively find the sponsorships and things like that pretty fast, because I did not want to write for the money, but I definitely wanted to quickly create something of value. And then you have kind of in 2023, all the AI talk starts happening, and that kind of made me realize the importance of authenticity in my writing and really bringing the human elements, being extremely honest about my own feelings in the writing and things like that, just so it has really strong grounding in humanity to stand out against, whatever's coming out from AI. I'm competing with hundreds of AI narration channels on YouTube, for example, and I'm sure in the podcast world too, it's harder to see. On YouTube, it's pretty obvious. And so it's like, how do you make yourself stand out? So if you listen to my stuff long enough, and I've gotten a lot of audience feedback on this, that they can kind of almost tell what sort of person I am just based on my stories. Even though they're these twisted, dark stories, they feel like they get a pretty good idea of my most inner person, because I'm pretty transparent just in the way that I write. Now, people get it wrong. They misinterpret things all the time, of course. I'm not writing biographies.
No, nobody does that.
I've had some funny comments about people very confident about who I am or what I am.
Because of the way you write and the bands you listen to. And
well, what's funniest is that a lot of times, growing up Christian, I reference Christian bands, and people think that means that I'm still actively listening to these bands. Like, well, not necessarily.
My next question is about books. What book, fiction or nonfiction, do you think every creative person should read, and how has it influenced your perspective as an artist? So I guess that's two different, but I mean, you could tie them together if you'd like.
Sure. Well, the book itself ties them together. On Writing by Stephen King, which may be another answer you get a lot if you're talking to writers. He's kind of the gold standard for what everybody wants to be in terms of a successful career and everything. So I think that's one that people tend to pick up early, and I'm certainly in that camp. He writes the first half sort of as an autobiography. He goes through his early days of writing and kind of how he got into it, leading up to his accident and how that shifted him. So it's fascinating just from that perspective. But the second half is very much him diving into his creative process, right down to the nitty-gritty of the fact that he shuts his door when he writes. Even if he's home by himself, he shuts the door. At least he did at the time he wrote this book 25 years ago, however long it's been now. He also talks about listening to music. And, he's also a bit of a hard rocker. And I was shocked and somewhat appalled to find out that he did most of his writing to AC/DC and Metallica. So I, of course, tried that. These are bands that I enjoy, and I just don't know how you can write to AC/DC ever. Metallica, I got a little bit farther, but
Well, you do know why he probably listens to AC/DC, right?
why is that?
Because the only movie he ever directed was Maximum Overdrive, and they did the soundtrack for him on that.
Maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's what it is.
He was also high as a kite, so he probably doesn't even remember them doing the soundtrack.
No.
I feel like you could probably write to whatever you want on cocaine.
Yeah, probably.
Like I said, we love horror movies, but I am not a fan of probably 90% of his stuff that's horror. I like Shawshank and the Stand By Me, and all his stuff that's not horror is always what I enjoy way more.
Have you seen Life of Chuck yet?
I have not.
Yeah, I did.
You should check it out. That's good.
Yeah, it's weird. I guess I have something in common with Stephen King, because if I'm home alone, I don't listen to music because I'm editing a podcast, but I do shut the door.
Yeah, it's something I picked up, and there's something about it, that privacy, even if it's sort of, you're faking it just by closing the door. It's not that far, to get in the rest of your house or whatever, but it closes you off, and I think gets you focused a little bit better.
So last question I have for you, and then, of course, if you want to ask us any questions, you're more than welcome to. Is there a famous person or someone in your personal life who has had a major influence on you as an artist, and what lessons from them still shape you and the way you create today?
Oh, man. Do I say Stephen King again? That's kind of the obvious one. You know who it is? Chuck Palahniuk, who's most famous for writing Fight Club. He's got a whole slew of books that most people don't know. And it's his writing, I think, that has influenced me the most. But he also did a nonfiction book sort of similar to Stephen King, where he dives into his creative process. And what that book did to me, and sort of his philosophy, was teach me to stick to what I already know works for me, because his creative process is so out there and so far removed from how I write. I sit here right where I am right now in front of my computer, and I type. Never, well, at least unless I have to be, never in public, never anywhere else really. He takes his notepad and his pencil, and he goes to the gym, he goes to the airport, he goes wherever, and he sits there and he writes around people. And that's kind of what inspires Chuck Palahniuk. And he's got all kinds of other kind of parts of his creative process that, I read that, and I love reading his work. I find his written work very inspiring, and I'd love to be able to write like that. But even just the thought of trying that, and I have kind of tried, when I'm in public, I'm like, let me get my phone out and just try doing some writing, seeing if this environment inspires something. It's just too distracting. And so that kind of told me, okay, just because somebody is successful and expert at the craft doesn't mean that what works for them is going to work for you. And that really hammered that home. So maybe the lessons I took from that book aren't what he intended, but they were still very critical lessons for me. He's also somebody who has no shame about doing commercials and things like that to pay the bills. He's realistic about that part of it. You can't always make a living doing exactly what you want to do. You got to take the good with the bad. I don't love doing ad reads or any of that stuff, but if it lets me do the work that I do love doing, I can do that. And he writes about that in his book too. So that had a pretty profound impact.
Well, there's some local horror movie writers and directors from the Quad City area, Scott Beck and Brian Woods. And I think Brian was at Snake Alley Festival of Film in Burlington, Iowa, and he talked about that. We do other stuff. We write other scripts so that the stuff we love, we are afforded to do that. So I think we kind of all do that. We do stuff that we don't want to do so that we can continue to put out other stuff.
Masterpieces like The Quiet Place, Haunt, Heretic that came out.
Yeah.
Those guys are amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I clock in 7:45 to 4:45 at an office every day. I do love my patients, but there's other stuff I'd rather be doing, but I got to pay the bills. So,
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And Rod hasn't started his OnlyFans yet, so I can't piggyback off of him.
All right.
So close. So close there. It's trying to get those foot pictures done
Just
right.
right.
It's tricky, isn't it?
It is, yeah. So do you have any questions for us then?
Gosh, I don't know.
We like to turn the tables sometimes.
Yeah. So we've touched on the age gap here. What's a movie that you guys would guess I've missed that I should check out? What's something you saw when you're young, maybe?
Oh, when I was young. My entry into horror is totally different from probably what your parents was, because you said your parents were showing you Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah, later on, as I was like a teenager, yep.
Yeah, I'm 47, so I don't know how old your parents are, but my early forte into horror was in the early 80s, and we had a friend that his mom would just be like, what do you guys want? Burger King? She'd go buy Burger King for everybody, and we'd go to the video store and she'd rent us whatever we wanted. So my early forte into horror films was pretty much all of the Faces of Death movies.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
a film called Truth or Dare, A Critical Consequence. It's a Tim Ritter shot on video movie where this guy catches his best friend with his wife. He goes insane. He cuts half of his face off. He cuts his tongue out. He chainsaws a kid in half. He loses his mind pretty much. It's, of course, shot on video, but that's my early forte into horror. So it was a lot, maybe more hardcore than Rod's or yours.
Yeah, it's amazing how you're family man right now, Brian.
But when you said found footage, I'm thinking, because you said Blair Witch is probably the most popular, more mainstream, but when I think found footage, probably one of my favorite found footage films, and a lot of people won't watch it because there's real animal death in the film, but the history in it is what pulls me to it, is Cannibal Holocaust.
Yeah.
You know, and I showed my son, who was probably 16 at the time, was like, okay, I got to preface this with all of these things about this movie, but it's very historically significant in not only movie culture, but horror movie culture, but history. Like, these people got pulled into court because all of these things that led to Blair Witch, like all the kids in Cannibal Holocaust signed this non-disclosure, so they all went missing, so nobody knew they were really alive. So all that stuff like bleeds into Blair Witch, you know, where they thought this all was real. I think you've seen it.
I have,
the movie. Yeah, but that's, to me, my early, maybe not early, I caught it a little bit later, but that's my forte into horror movies. And it's funny, it all is just one big ball of twine. When you talk about Blair Witch, I can go back to one that I've seen, and this other person could go back to one. They're like, oh yeah, but what about this one?
Exactly.
And this one, you know, and we just all pull together.
Well, mine was my mom, who was the one that let me watch these movies because she'd rent the videos and stuff. There was several, like, she would let us watch Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, Halloween movies. But one that I remember, one of the earliest memories, was waking up in the middle of the night, going downstairs. My dad is like passed out, you know, and the TV's on, and it's like HBO or something, like Free Weekend or whatever. And Night of the Demons is on. And it's like, wow, this is pretty damn cool. Like, I hadn't got to watch one like this, where it was the haunted house movie where the kids are trapped. And then one of my earliest movies I got to see in an indoor theater was Freddy's Dead, the 3D, where there's very little 3D. So, you know, just things like that. That's how I grew up. And then I later, as an adult, you go back and you see like what Brian saw, like Cannibal Holocaust, and, you know, just some of the other classics like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Hellraiser and all that. But yeah, that's how mine went. Not as crazy as Brian's.
Oh, I probably didn't see Texas Chainsaw Massacre until I was in my 30s, just because it wasn't, I guess, weird enough.
Yeah.
I like how you said when you write, people can notice that. I feel like that's something with movies we're getting away from, some of that older stuff that's being cleaned up so much. I talked about this with my co-host Clint on our horror podcast. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is getting 4K now, and it looks too good. Like, it's not gritty, grimy anymore. It's like, this isn't even what it was to start out with. You know, let's get back to what some of the original stuff. Let's get away from this AI and all this stuff that's cleaning up. Let's get back to where people are organic.
Yeah. Well, let's be honest about the tools they had at the time. You know, we don't need to pretend that they lived in an era where they were shooting in 4K. It's like they had what they had. That movie is as successful and, you know, well loved as is. You know, we don't have to go back and keep making it quote unquote better.
And some of those movies, they intentionally made it look grimy. And, you know, like the grind, and like they would take the film and they would throw dirt on it and just, you know, get the little grindhouse feel kind of for those. So I guess, do you have anything you want to promote then? I mean, your podcast, you got some other things going on?
Yeah, really, it's just the podcast right now. I'm not working on any books at the moment. And so the Warning Woods podcast is available anywhere people listen to podcasts. It's also on YouTube. I do have a Patreon, patreon.com/The Warning Woods. And there, every time I put a story out, I follow it up a few days later with kind of behind the scenes podcast called Into the Woods. It's just me by myself kind of explaining the thought process of how I put the story together, if there's any sort of, you know, fun little anecdotes that go along with it. And then I usually wrap it it up by giving people a couple recommendations of things that I've seen or read or listened to recently. So that's just kind of a nice little bonus podcast I do for the Patreons there. But other than that, really just the Warning Woods for now. I'm staying focused on that at the moment.
You said people can buy your books on Amazon.
Yep, they're available on Amazon. If you happen to be in Ames, Iowa, they're at Dog-Eared Books downtown. It's the only physical retailer selling them right now. But yeah, otherwise, they're all available on Amazon.
All right. Thank you so much, Miles. We appreciate you coming on. I can't wait to get more into your books to see what's going on in that head of yours, and then to keep listening, because I mean, I've got so many more episodes of The Warning Woods to listen to that it's going to take me a while. But yeah, I will get through them eventually.
Sounds great.
Oh, yeah. And he's sending me the ones that he thinks I'll like. He's like,
Awesome.
You need to listen to this one and this one and this one. I love to torture my family with the Twilight Zone radio hour because, you know, I got a 7-year-old and then my girlfriend's sitting next to me trying to read, and I'm just putting on all these audio shows that I'm loving. And she's like, oh, God, turn that off. Put some music on. Like, no, I'm digging this. I'm into this.
That's awesome. Well, thank you both for having me on. It's been really fun. I love this conversation.
I was glad we could catch you off guard with some questions.
Yeah.
And continue to do that because, and I purposely don't send them to the guests because I was like, I want, like I said, that organic. You thought about it for maybe 10 seconds, but then, you know, most of it was like right off the top of your head.
Yep, that's a good way to do it.
So yeah, definitely. We'll put all your links to everything in this episode synopsis, and you'll have to stick around and see what's coming next from Miles.
Yeah, and wait till we have the next episode of Red Fog Radio. Who will we have? What will it be?
Tune in next month as we wander back into the fog in search of new artists on Red Fog Radio.